Well, hi, and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. I'm Renee Williams, and I'm here with my co-host, Billy Thomas, and we both work at the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And you know what? Our show is jam-packed today.
Yes, as always, we've loaded it up with great content for you all. I'm really excited to have you all with us today, this beautiful day in Kentucky. Enjoy it. It's going to get a little cooler later this week. So take care of any outdoor stuff you need probably this evening if you need to. But again, great show today. Thank you all for taking a little time to be with us. And we're going to be talking about some invasive plants with Dr. Ellen Crocker. We also have Laurie Thomas with her ever popular tree of the week. We have our very own Chad Nyman, who's going to be with us talking about some of the stave research. And if you don't know, a stave is that slat of wood that goes into a barrel that they use to store bourbon in. So we'll learn about that. Chad's heavily involved in that work. And then we're going to wrap it up with Megan Bulin. She's got us a really cool mushroom that is just now popping out. So stick around. It's going to be a great show. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can use the chat pod to interact with us. And if you're joining us via Facebook Live, please use the comment section and we'll respond as quickly. But Renee, glad to be with you again on another great show.
Definitely, definitely. So let's get started with Dr. Crocker.
All right. I always love Ellen's segment. She does such a great job.
I know.
Wonderful. Great to be here with you all today.
So are we just talking invasives in general today or about something specific?
Today, I'm going to be talking about invasive plants in general.
Right.
So what are they? What are they doing? What are some of the common invasive plants? And just kind of scratching the surface with their management. We could talk all day, all month, all year about invasive plants because there are so many of them. They are really variable and they're a real challenge for land management. So today, we're just going to be scratching the surface with that on invasive plants, telling you a little bit of background about them. Hopefully you can see my slide okay, and let me know if not. My first kind of question when it comes to invasive plants that I get a lot are, what are invasive plants? Because, that term is really subjective. Different people might mean different things when they're talking about invasive plants. You might refer to something as invading when you don't like it, whether it's a weed in your garden or something that's taking over an old field. But the federal definition of invasive plant has these two components that I think are really useful for us to keep in mind. First, that it is not native to wherever we're talking about. It's from some other part of the world. And second, that when it's introduced, it causes harm. So those are the two key parts of the definition of invasive plant. It's from somewhere else and we don't like it. It's causing problems. Now that's obviously a pretty subjective definition because we're going to call things invasive when we don't like them and not when we do. And another kind of part of what is true for most invasive plants is that these tend to be things that will spread rapidly and take over. So if they just stayed put, we wouldn't really care about them, right? But the fact that they are taking over and causing problems is the major issue there. So a couple other kind of points on terminology when we're talking about invasive plants. Invasive does not mean totally devoid of value, right? Just because it's non-native and it's causing problems doesn't mean that it is negative in every possible aspect. And I've included two pictures of two plants here that come up a lot for me. The first one is mimosa, which is an invasive tree. And the second one is autumn olive, which is an invasive shrub. And I don't like them because they are invasive. They are not from here. They do not play well with our native species. They will take over and cause problems. Now, mimosa is a beautiful tree. People love it. Every year when it blooms, I'll get emails, what's this beautiful tree and where can I find it? I'd love to plant it in my landscape. And I have to say, no, why don't you plant one of our natives instead? So just because it's pretty does not mean that it's not invasive. And many of the invasive plants that we have were actually introduced in the landscape because someone liked the way that they looked, because they were beautiful or they did did something that we like. So this autumn olive is another example because people will harvest it for its berries and make fruit leather and other things from them. And if you Google autumn olive, what you're going to find is lots of videos about how to grow it, but not as much about how to control it, which is a shame because it will take over and form really dense thickets. I am all for using those berries, might as well use them, but definitely not something you want to promote. It was promoted in the past for erosion control, and we have since learned our lesson. So invasive does not mean that they're going to be negative in every possible sense. And I liked this, if you could just stop buying those invasives because they're pretty, that would be great, because many of them are pretty, but that doesn't mean that they are good selections and they won't spread and cause problems. Similarly, non-native doesn't mean that something's bad. It just means that it's not originally from here. It's from some other part of the world. Many agricultural crops that we value are non-native, and trees that applies as well, whether we're talking about something like an apple tree, or a valued landscape tree like a ginkgo. They're not from here, but they also don't tend to cause the problems that we see in these invasive species. At the same time, just because something's native does not necessarily mean that you want it. There are plenty of native species that people might try to get rid of, whether it's because that just doesn't fit what you want, they're competing with other species that you want, or if they're like this native species that I try to get rid of when I find it around, poison ivy. It's a native species, it's got food for wildlife, but I also don't want to see it around where I tend to walk. Or native species like grapevines that might cause problems in your woods, might grow into the canopy of those smaller trees, prevent their access to light and kind of impact their growth. You might want to manage them for many reasons, but they're not considered invasive because they're native and they're really unlikely to kind of take over large areas in a way that's going to hurt the native vegetation. Now, some natives can take over, and they can take over in smaller areas, kind of forming really dense stands. These are just a few examples of those. Things like our native cane, which is a bamboo and can take over. Now there's an invasive version of that that you really don't want, versus this native, which has a really important role. It just might not be in your backyard. And the same would apply to sumac, which can grow really densely in stands, another valuable native species. And this is a picture of spicebush. I love spicebush in my landscape plantings. But if you're kind of trying to manage your woodland and you've got a lot of spicebush in there, you might want to manage it for other reasons. Not because it's an invasive, but because it might be inhibiting some of the regeneration you want to see. Is it likely to take over and really decrease the health of your woods? Definitely not. It's an important contributor nonetheless. So I wanted to kind of provide some of that terminology and those differences when we're talking about invasive, when we're talking about native and non-native. So what are a few characteristics of invasive plants? First, many of them have really high reproduction. So they can produce lots and lots of seeds. In this case, I'm showing you a picture of autumn olive with its fruit because I think it really well represents a lot of these invasive characteristics. In addition to producing lots of seeds, they can disperse them rapidly, whether that's from them, having seeds that are moved around on the air, or in the case of autumn olive here, having seeds that birds like to eat and move around. Many of these are very fast growing species that can tolerate a wide range of habitats. Kind of what we'd consider early successional species. They're the first things that like to move in after there's a disturbance. And for many of these invasives, they are lacking these natural predators, these things that for our native species would keep them in check if they got too abundant. Those insects and diseases, these invasives tend to leave them behind wherever they're coming from. And it takes a while for them to accumulate and acquire those new checks on their growth here. In the meantime, time, they're at a big advantage relative to our native plants. And then many of these can actually change the environment in ways that benefit them. When it comes to invasive plants, I think there's a few other things that are really good to consider. First, there can be a long lag time between when a plant is introduced and when it becomes invasive. And I think this is really confusing for people who've been gardening with something for a while and think, oh, it's been in my garden for years and I've never had a problem with it. Sometimes it can take a while before these plants build up the populations they need to spread across the landscape. If you think about something like bush honeysuckle, that's actually been planted as an ornamental in the US since the late 1800s. And only more recently has it become such a huge problem. Similarly, invasive plants don't necessarily behave invasively in all contexts. So you might have something that is fine in your yard, but once it gets out of there, it doesn't stay put and it will spread across the landscape. Some invasives can actually sit around and wait for years for the right opportunity to arise, and then they can take off. And this is a problem in our woodland settings because you might think you don't have any invasives until some disturbance comes through, changes things, and all of a sudden you're seeing invasive plants where you never knew they were before. And you might wonder, did those just arrive or have they been there waiting this whole time for the right opportunity to grow and thrive? And then with invasive plants, the game is constantly changing. There's always new invasives that are arriving that are causing problems. There's a few scenarios when invasive plants are more likely to appear. And I just wanted to give some examples of those. Not that invasive plants need any opportunity to show up, but there are a few times when you really want to be on the lookout for them. In your woods, this could be if you're having a harvest. What does a harvest do? It's going to increase sunlight levels. So if you do have any of those invasives that are just hanging out, waiting, they've got the perfect opportunity to take off and have lots of access to sunlight. It's going to cause soil disturbance, which invasives, they're rapid colonizers. They can take advantage of. And then you've got the potential to introduce new seeds or kind of other propagules that could take over and spread with that movement of equipment. You can see invasives arriving along roads or trails. This is a picture of Japanese chafflower that is a new invader that's becoming problematic. And one of the key things about its movement is that it has these tiny little seeds that will embed in cloth and clothing. And because of that, you'll see it popping up if you've got an infestation. And then any hiking trails nearby, you can see it there because people are accidentally spreading it around. You might see invasives popping up after a fire where you have that kind of increased light level and exposed soil. You might see them popping up after some kind of timber stand improvement. If you're doing something in your woods, you might even be managing other invasive plants and then see new ones popping up. In our area, I see this a lot with emerald ash borer. The emerald ash borer has come in. It has killed the ash trees, and what has taken their place? What we want to be taking their place are the many native trees that we have. Too frequently, what I see taking their place is invasive species. In this photo, you can see a stand that had ash in it. Those ash died. And what filled that niche? Bush honeysuckle, a really dense stand of it, taking over and growing really rapidly. So pretty much anytime there's a disturbance, you can count on invasives trying to exploit that, to take advantage of that, whether it is some management or whether it's something natural, like in this photo, an ice storm. And even sometimes if there's no disturbance, invasives are incredibly crafty and very good at what they're doing, trying to just exist and get by and spread in our landscapes. So just an example of some of the diversity of different invasive plants. There are over 500 invasive plants on record, and new ones arrive all the time. Here in Kentucky, we have many, and different plants are problematic in different areas. What's kind of new to you in one area might be more familiar to others in other parts of the state. But just to kind of give an example of some of the most problematic invasive plants and the types of invasive plants, you have invasive trees like tree of heaven and princess tree, and mimosa that I mentioned earlier, and of course calorie pear, that is taking over our old field sites, especially in central and northern Kentucky. Why are invasive trees a problem? Because they are directly competing with the native trees that we want to be filling those spaces instead. We've got lots of invasive species that can crowd out those natives, shade them out, and kind of clog things up, set that timeline back. So let's say you have an old field site that you're trying to turn into a woodland. Instead, it's just going to be this dense sea of calorie pear, which you don't want. Versus if you didn't have that, hopefully you'd be seeing all sorts of great native trees and shrubs and other species. We also have a lot of native shrubs, and they can get in understories, old fields, roadsides, edges, disturbed areas, and just clog them up, forming these dense thickets where you're not going to see the diversity of native plants that you want to see. Things like multiflora rose or burning bush, which this time of year is a beautiful red color, and that's why people like it, and that's why they plant it in a landscape setting. But of course, it does not stay put, and it will spread into natural areas, causing big problems. There's also bush honeysuckle and many other invasive woody shrubs. We also have invasive vines, things like kudzu, Japanese honeysuckle, winter creeper, and more that can carpet areas. So decreasing the diversity of native plants that are present there, whether they're herbaceous plants or regeneration, small trees and shrubs that are coming up, it can carpet those over and prevent them from being able to establish. Some of these vines can also get up into the canopies of your trees and cause problems that way as well, both in terms of kind of suffocating those trees and not giving them access to light that they need, but also impacting them in terms of increasing the likelihood that they're going to fall down in a major wind event or an ice storm. There are many, many more invasive plants, from grasses and herbaceous species like this miscanthus and Japanese stilt grass. There are lots of them, and there are always new ones arriving. So when it comes to, which invasive plants should you be on the lookout for, it depends. It depends on where you're located, what are you most concerned about, and what's already present in your area. Depending on what we're talking about, if we're talking about an old field versus a stand that has established large trees, and what part of the state you're in, different plants are going to be more problematic. So that's always something that you're going to want to go through and assess. When it comes to invasive plants, here are some key management considerations. This is a graph I like to show of invasion, and how plants invade when they become a problem, when they're noticed, and how hard it is to manage them. And the big takeaway here is that the longer something has been here, the more of it is, the harder it's going to be to manage it. So by the time most people notice invasive problems in their woods, it's going to be really hard to completely eradicate those. Not that you can't have a huge impact, you can locally, but the earlier you can catch something, whether that's kind of across the landscape as a whole or in your backyard, the easier it's going to be to manage it. So prevention is by far the most effective thing. If you can prevent invasive plants from arriving, then that saves you a lot of work from having to deal with them in the future. Invasives are often accidentally introduced or even promoted before we realize that they're invasive. So if you can minimize the movement of invasive plants, if you can use natives instead of trying some new non-native that might become a problem in the future. That's a big help right there. Second, if you can detect something early and then eradicate it locally before it becomes a problem, that is really advantageous. So if you are walking around in your woods and if you see a few stems of bush honeysuckle, you can just pull those up easily versus trying to deal with a sea of it once it's spread. Now that's much more involved. It requires you doing more disturbance to that site. It can still be done. It can still be really effective. It's just a lot easier to do when it hasn't spread out of control yet. And then finally, with management, is thinking about long-term control and management. So if you are dealing with an area that was really heavily impacted, you want to be thinking about what is it going to look like, not next year, but 5, 10, 20 years from now. Because when it comes to invasive plants, one and done does not work. It's going to be a continuous effort to both get rid of the invasives that are already there, but also prevent new ones from arriving. It can be done, and woodland owners that work at this see big results in terms of the biodiversity that's present, the native plants that are present when they remove those invasives. It's amazing how quick those can come back. Things that you might not have even realized were hiding in there, just kind of waiting for the chance to grow more. You can see big impacts in terms of the quality of your woods, the health of your woods, wildlife, and other things by managing invasive plants. It just requires patience and persistence. So when we're thinking about invasive plants or other woodland health threats, I just wanted to mention a few of the great resources that are around the state, whether there are county extension agents that are available in every county in the state to help with different problems, whether it's the Kentucky Division of Forestry and their foresters, or consulting foresters to help with invasive plants and other issues, technical service providers that can actually help on the ground, removing some of these invasives, and then NRCS, which provides cost share funding opportunities for landowners to support the removal of some of these invasive plants. And then, of course, the Kentucky Woodland Owners Association to talk with other woodland owners who've dealt with similar things and can help you out trying to figure out what's best. If you're managing invasive plants, there is nothing better than working with your neighbors, because if you manage all of your invasive plants in your woods, but they're still in your neighbor's woods, that doesn't help you as much as if you work together on these issues. So there are many more resources out there, and there are lots of great books and guides that are available online about invasive plant management. If this is something that you're interested in learning more about, I really recommend that you join us next week, next Tuesday, for the Kentucky Invasive Plant Conference. It's happening online over Zoom, and it's free from 9 to 12 Eastern time. And we'll put a link in the chat to that. And you'll hear from experts around the country for everything on how to recognize new invasive species that are moving into our area, how to effectively manage those, as well as great native alternatives to invasive plants that you could be using, and then what's going on in terms of regulation of invasive plants in other states. So I hope that you will be able to join us for that. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. There are lots of great resources available to help you with your invasive plant issues. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and see what questions might have come up.
Well, thank you, Ellen. We greatly appreciate that presentation. Yesterday we were driving to Quicksand, and on the side of the road, there was just tons of invasive plants. And I can imagine that if you actually owned that and saw how they just spread everywhere, how that could be very overwhelming. So where would you start for someone who has one? What's the one thing that you should start with?
Well, and I think the trick is that it's unlikely that you just have one. When we're talking about invasive plants, we're talking about habitat management. We're talking about woodland health in general and what you can be doing to improve the health of your woods overall. So it's not just invasive plants. It's probably likely to go hand in hand with other discussions that you want to be having about the health of your woods. So I think that there's some really good places to start. I think one of those could be working with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, with a service forester there to come up with a management plan. What do you have? Where should you go from there? I think your county agent is another great resource for, what are people seeing in your area? How can they best manage them? Because what works in one area isn't going to work as well in another. If you have, I mentioned bush honeysuckle several times. I would tell somebody something totally different if they have a few sprigs of bush honeysuckle here or there, a totally different strategy than if they have a sea of it with nothing else. Getting someone who can be familiar with what's going on with you and give you some advice that's tailored to that is really key. So in addition, there are paid professionals like consulting foresters and others, technical service providers who can provide some of that information. I can't brag on NRCS enough for the support that they provide to landowners as well, in the terms of cost share options to actually support you getting some stuff done in your woods. There's a lot of great resources out there for you, and I know another great one is Billy Thomas with our woodland owner education program. Billy, are there other great starting places for woodland owners if they're starting to think about their invasive plants?
No, I think you approached it really well, Ellen. And again, make it part of a comprehensive effort. And I guess I would want to chime into Renee's thought, and you've said this before, Ellen, to prevent from having the whole hillside or the whole road covered with these invasives, let's get them early, right? The value of that early detection, that monitoring, that being there with the woods. I guess the only other thing I would say, Ellen, regarding like NRCS and some of those programs, by having a forest management plan in place on your property, not only are you aware of what you have, but that makes you eligible to participate in those programs. So it's kind of that important step that you'll need to do. And as Ellen mentioned, we have a lot of professionals out there that are available to work with you, and they want to. So take advantage of that. And Ellen, you covered a lot of ground. Invasive plants. And this conference looks great. Is it for basically everyone?
Anyone is invited to this conference. It's free. It's online. We hope you join us. It's being hosted by the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council as well as University of Kentucky. And we have a great lineup of speakers. If you are a Kentucky pesticide applicator, there are CEUs available as well. And one of the things that I like about it is that, the goal is not to have no invasive plants. Not only is that not always a realistic goal, but what I really want are vibrant, vigorous native plant communities. The reason I don't like the invasives is they get in the way of that. And so not only are we going to be talking about invasives, but we're going to be talking about these great natives as well. And I think that's a valuable thing to think about in your woodland management when we're thinking about invasive plants. It's great to have, to get rid of your invasive plants, but what you really want to see are natives taking their place.
Well, I think that's such a great thing that the exotic plant invasive plant council is working on, as far as providing these alternatives, because people are attracted many times for the beauty of these invasive plants, right? Whether it be the flowers or their colors or whatever. And if you can give them something else that's a better replacement, that's a great thing. So I think that's really great y'all are working on that. And I know, Ellen, you have an important role in that council as well. So thank you for your leadership in that group as well. Yeah, check out that conference, folks. You'll get a lot of great information. I know if Ellen's involved, it's going to be awesome.
And Ellen will put the link in the chat box, so you'll be able to. All right.
And thanks for having me on today.
As always, great. Thank you, Ellen.
Moving on to our tree of the week. Lori, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about one of our fall flowering trees or shrubs, which is kind of unusual, and it's the witch hazel. So here's witch hazel.
Wonderful.
Get it rolling.
I'm Laurie Thomas with the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, witch hazel. Hamamelis virginiana is a small native tree or shrub that has attractive fall foliage and fragrant flowers. It is in the Hamamelidaceae family, which is represented by 3 genera in the United States: Fothergilla, liquid ambar, and Hamamelis. The Hamamelis genera is comprised of 3 species in the United States. Witch hazel is also known as common witch hazel, and winter bloom. This deciduous tree or shrub typically has a short trunk with numerous spreading crooked branches and typically reaches about 20 feet tall. Witch hazel is a very attractive ornamental for naturalized settings, and there are numerous cultivars, and it has long been used medicinally. Witch hazel is found in the eastern half of the United States from Canada to northern Florida and west to Wisconsin and Arkansas. In Kentucky, it's found mostly in the eastern half of the state. Witch hazel is found on a variety of sites, but does best in moist woodlands such as valleys and coves, and on east and north-facing slopes with organically rich acidic soils. It is commonly found growing with white ash, flowering dogwood, hop hornbeam, and rhododendron. If planting in a landscape, make sure you choose a north-facing aspect with semi-shade, as it is classed as tolerant. Witch hazel reproduces mainly by seed. Witch hazel is deciduous with alternately arranged leaves on the twig, as you can see in the photo. The leaves are simple in form, and they're broadly oval to egg-shaped or obovate, with the leaf narrowing at the base and about 3 to 6 inches long. The margins are wavy, and the leaf is dark green above and paler below. The leaf petiole is pubescent, and the twigs zigzag. Fall leaf color is yellow and can be very showy. This species is monoecious, which means a tree will have both male and female flowers, and the flowers are very attractive and very fragrant. The flowers are bright yellow with 4 1/2 to 3/4 inch long slender petals, and they resemble yellow spiders on the plant. The flowers bloom in mid to late fall, and they can often be the only color in the woods when all the autumn leaves lay on the forest floor. They are fragrant and smell kind of spicy. The flowers are pollinated by the noctune moth or owlet moth, as well as other insects. The fruit is a woody brown capsule, about 1/2 inch long, and the capsule usually contains 2 shiny black seeds that are about 1/4 inch long. The fruit matures by late summer of the following year, and the seeds are forcibly ejected several yards from the parent tree when the capsules split open. The seeds take an additional year to germinate after dispersal, and witch hazel typically starts flower and fruit production after year 6. The bark is smooth, gray to gray-brown on young and older stems with a reddish-purple inner bark, and the wood is hard and close-grained, but due to its size, the wood is not commercially used. Witch hazel is of moderate wildlife importance. The flowers are pollinated by moths. The fruit is eaten by turkey, ruffed grouse, northern bobwhite, pheasant, white-tailed deer, beaver, and rabbit, and deer may occasionally utilize it for browse. Witch hazel has long been used for a variety of medicinals. The bark was mixed with water and alcohol to make an astringent for sores and bruises. The leaves, twigs, and bark have been distilled to make a topical agent for soothing minor skin irritations. In the United States, witch hazel water is regulated as an over-the-counter drug for external use only. Witch hazel has also been used in natural landscape plantings in the past, but today most of the witch hazel used in landscaping is the Asian witch hazel and its cultivars that bloom in late winter. The national champion witch hazel as of 2021 is in Russell, Virginia. It is 34 inches in circumference, 34 feet tall, with a 29-foot crown spread. Kentucky currently does not have a champion witch hazel listed. If you'd like to know more about national champion trees, check out American Forest Champion Trees or check out the Kentucky Division of Forestry Champion Trees. Now for a few fun facts about witch hazel. American witch hazel was used by early settlers as a dowsing rod. The end of a forked branch would bend or dip toward an underground water source when it was detected by the dowser, and the people using the dowsing rod were called water diviners or water witches. Another less common name is snapping hazel because the seeds are ejected from the seed pod more than 12 feet away from the parent tree when ripe. The name witch in witch hazel is from Old and Middle English wick or rice and means pliant or bendable. The scientific genus name Hamelis is Latin and is from the Greek meaning medlar or medlar fruit, referring to the fruit, and the specific epithet Virginiana means from Virginia. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, local park, or neighborhood and enjoy the tremendous trees of Kentucky, including the wonderful witch hazel.
Well, thank you, Lori, for that presentation. We greatly appreciate it. And, you know, for some reason, I always thought like witch hazel had to do something with witches, is why they why they named it that way. But would we know what other trees or plants are related to witch hazel?
Yeah, so they're in the Hemimelidaceae family. We have 3 genera here. I know that's a hard
Mouthful.
thing to say. I know.
Easy for you to say. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You got to practice it a little bit, but so there's liquid ambar, which is sweet gum. So we know sweet gum, it's got the star-shaped leaves and those that group of achenes, those prickly little balls that hurt when you walk on them barefooted in the yard. And then there's also fothergilla, which is a shrub, and it's one that's used a lot in landscaping. It's got lovely little bottle brush looking flowers and great fall in the spring, and then great fall color in the fall. So yeah, those are the ones that it's related to here in the United States. So yeah, hopefully you get out, you'll be able to see some that's still flowering, because it will flower through November, kind of depending on the site that it's on, but you can get out and see some witch hazel.
Yeah, it's such a treat to see kind of a flower this time of year. So really
It
cool.
is.
A cool
Yeah.
plant, really
Yeah.
is. Oh, thank you, Laurie. We enjoy those segments. Yep.
All right, take care.
All right.
Bye.
Cool.
All right. So moving on, we have some research going on here at the University of Kentucky.
And it's kind of important to a big industry here in the
A little
state.
bit.
Yeah.
A little important.
If you haven't heard, they make bourbon in Kentucky, and in order to make bourbon, they have to have white oak barrels. And what goes into those white oak barrels is a really important product, staves. So our very own Chad Nyman and is going to be talking to us about some of his work on staves and what important work, especially here in Kentucky.
Thank you, Billy, for that introduction there. I'm excited to be able to talk with you all today about some of this research and give a little sneak peek into some of the ongoing work we have. And so we are going to be talking about those staves that go into those barrels. And the aim of this research is supporting this bourbon barrel manufacturing that Billy said was so important to the state, as 95% of the bourbon is made here in Kentucky. And so this project has a lot of industry support. We have partners that help to inform and provide guidance. So a lot of work has gone in on the front end to develop this project, and it stemmed out of some extension work that we've had in supporting some of these industries in the past. And so those partners that we've got are Brown-Forman Cooperage and Robinson Stave and Cumberland Cooperage, as well as Canton Cooperage. The staves that we are monitoring and using have been donated by Brown-Forman for our use. And so we're working heavily with these folks and communicating a lot with them as this project keeps ongoing. And so this project is also in partnership with the James Beam Institute and the White Oak Initiative, which I have some links there as well for those 2 different groups. And so we talk a little bit about a stave. What exactly is a stave? And those are those individual wood pieces that make up that barrel. So they're approximately 3 foot long. They vary in width, somewhere between about 1 inch to 5 inches. They are all white oak. And so the goals of this research is to determine some economical treatments that can help to reduce checking during that drying process that goes on. And so if you're unfamiliar with that drying process, it occurs largely outdoors, and it goes on at a minimum of 6 months that this wood will sit out there in an open field. And so we're looking at some ways that we can adapt the current processes economically and make them simple and applied to be able to get used and implemented. And so we're trying to extend the use of that purchased white oak that goes into these barrels. So the white oak wood is the most expensive ingredient in the bourbon, which leaves a lot of opportunity to be able, even small percentages of improvements can be very large dollar economic improvements, as well as being able to make more barrels. And so another goal is we want to be able to better document that drying rate and the moisture loss and gain of those individual staves in the different areas throughout the stacks. And we want to be able to understand stack moisture variation within and amongst the stacks. So whether that moisture varies, in the top or the bottom of the stack, or even amongst the stacks in a particular area of the drying yard. And so there's a lot of data collection that goes along with these different staves that we have and the treatments that we have ongoing. And so working with this industry partner, Brown-Forman, we are able to go on site to their industry facility and be able to identify those sample staves and label them all with the individual unique identification number that we're able to record the weights for each of those staves and be able to go through and at recurring intervals, be able to reweigh those staves to track that moisture gain or loss, as well as being able to apply that encoding of that subset of staves that is getting that emulsion treatment. And so as we're weighing all those sample staves, we're recording that data. That way we can analyze that moisture loss and gain. And so once we've got all of those initial data collected and treatment at the facility applied, then we work with those professionals who work at that facility to be able to place those sample staves exactly where we want them within the stacks. That way, each of those regions has samples that we're able to get that moisture gain and loss, as well as check data as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And so a bit more about this study. So we have 921 staves in each of these stacks. And of those 921 staves that make up a stack, each of those pieces, we have 120 of those staves that are the samples within each stack. And so, as I mentioned, we're going through and repeatedly weighing those sample staves. In this first phase, we've been weighing the samples twice a week. And so we're doing that up into a point called fiber saturation, which is an important number for damage inside of those pieces of wood. And so once you get below fiber saturation, the risk of damaging that wood is greatly reduced. And so we were really interested in getting that moisture gain and loss information up to that fiber saturation point. And so going forward, we'll be able to reduce the number of times a week that we're sampling those staves. But there are 8 stave stacks. So each of these large stacks here is, that assemblage of 921 staves. And so we have 8 of those in each of these seasonal tests. And there are 3 seasonal tests that we have throughout this research project. And so the very first one we kicked off at the very beginning of July. The next phase, phase 2, we're getting ready to initiate next week. So here in mid-November. And the third and final phase will take place in mid-February. And so the 2 treatments that are applied is the encoding. It's a food grade emulsion. It's called Anchor Seal 2. And that product is applied directly to the ends of those staves. And then the shade dry cloth is the other treatment. And so the purpose of those treatments is to test against the controls to see if we can reduce that checking, because the checking causes a loss of wood. It has to be trimmed back. And so, these staves, if you have to trim a lot off the ends, it might become heading material, which is the shorter material that is used for the top and bottom of the barrel. And so they really want to get more staves and less heading material. They always have an abundance of heading. And so they're trying to increase the amount of stave material. And so the sample staves that we have, there's 120 sample staves within each of these stacks. This diagram on the left is a bit much, but this is just a representation of each of the different sample staves that we have. And so black and red labeled sample staves are the treatment staves that are receiving that end coating with the emulsion. And so the black staves are the moisture loss samples, and the red ones are the check samples. And then we have green and blue labeled staves, which are the controls. They did not receive any treatment. And so those green marked staves are the moisture loss samples, and the blue are the check samples. And so just to give a quick representation, you can see a stave that has been encoded with the emulsion with the black mark here, and a stave here with a green mark that has not received that treatment. So here's the control. And you can see there are far more end checks in the end of this stave that did not receive that emulsion treatment. And this is fairly representative of what we're seeing throughout these stacks. And by performing these 3 different seasonal tests, we'll be able to see certain times of the year where it might be more appropriate and cost effective to use that emulsion to treat those staves. A little bit more about the study. We're monitoring each of these seasonal sets for right at 6 months. And so there is the check sampling and the moisture sampling components. And so as I was saying, we're going through regularly and weighing these staves, and we're looking at the checks. And at the end, we will have some destructive sampling with those sample staves to be able to determine how far those checks go in on the control staves. And so at the end of that 6 months, we'll be able to have that number, that determination of that damage of checks to the ends and to the edges of the staves, as well as that full amount of information on the moisture sampling, that moisture loss and gain, and what that curve looks like and for the moisture for those. And so we'll be able to make some comparisons from the different regions of the stack and within and amongst those stacks. And so just a little bit more information about some of the other data that we've got available to help with some of this analysis. There is a Mesonet weather station on site at the Quicksand Research Station, also called Robinson Center for Appalachian Resource Sustainability, RCARS for short. So there is, precipitation and wind speed, solar data, temperature data available that we can use in that analysis, as well as some relative humidity and temperature sensors that we have placed within these stacks. And so we have these onset temperature and relative humidity sensors that are within a few of those stacks to give us a little bit more refined data specifically within those regions of the stack, and comparing the edges to the middle of the stacks. And so all in all, there's going to be 24 stave stacks on this yard by the time that everything is coming to an end. But I do have information additional to this conversation we've had today with a press release that was put out by the UK Ag Communications Department. And so that link is down there at the bottom if there's any other information that you'd like to receive, as well as you can reach out to me if you have any questions. But that's all that I have for today.
Well, thank you, Chad. We greatly appreciate that presentation. And I guess your research with this is exactly like what would be going on at a yard that is actually just drying staves. Is that correct?
It is. We've tried our best to make this repeatable, but also applied. And so trying to keep it as real world as possible, even though it is this, artificial research yard there at the
Right.
utilization center, but doing our best to make it applicable and applied to the real world.
Okay.
Chad, this is so important, your work is, and I mean, the implications can be really big. So, I mean, plus it's such a great example of kind of applied research, and how extension can work and try to address needs of our partners and stakeholders. So, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing and look forward to hearing more as this kind of comes. And I think we did have a question in the chat pod about the treatments, one of your treatments, the emulsion treated staves. Are they treated differently in the construction of the barrels?
My understanding is some of this emulsion has been tested in a very small applications within a few of these cooperages. And so they have used this material in one or two of these companies in a small, test. And so this gives us a little bit larger opportunity to test that. And so with it being a food grade material, as I understand, there shouldn't be any different treatment in the construction of those barrels. It's really a test just to see if this can reduce that checking and save more of that wood for the construction of barrels, more from a sustainability standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can help us have less waste, that's less drain on the resource that's out there, So, I mean, it's important work what you're doing. It really is.
I'm sure everything just leads to another whole new set of questions
Yeah.
that you possibly come up with.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing from you again about what you find out about all this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Renee and Billy. It's been great
Yeah.
to be with you all today.
Well, thank you, Chad. Appreciate all you do for our forest industry here in Kentucky. It's important work, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, moving on, we do
Yeah.
have a mushroom highlight for
I
today.
know Megan Bulin, who does such a great job and works in Dr. Crocker's lab, has got a great segment for us today on a really cool fungus.
Yes.
That's right. Today we're going to be talking about earth star fungi. They're a really cool group of mushrooms that you see popping up throughout the year, but right now in the fall, when a lot of the other mushrooms that might be a little bit more showy and noticeable have started to fade into the background for the season, you really start to notice these little earth star fungi and other puffball mushrooms popping up all over the place as we get into some of these fall rains.
Okay.
This is Geastrum fimbriatum. It is the sessile earth star. These are really beautiful gastromycete fungi. As gastromycetes, all of their spores are inside that fruiting body. There are no gills, no pores, no teeth, nothing like that. The earth star fungi, they start out as a closed kind of globe, and as they start to mature, they open up and these beautiful arms that give them their star name spread out, usually 5 to 9 arms on this species of earth star, and create this beautiful sun or star-like pattern around this central portion of the fruiting body, which is where the spores are held. When it's ready to release its spores, that little ostiole will open and the spores will be able to escape through that structure with wind or raindrops falling on the mushroom. These fungi like to grow on decaying material, on rotting logs, or on the forest floor as saprobes. They're a really fun little group of fungi.
Well, Megan, that to me, I don't think I've ever seen that.
Really cool little.
Really cool mushroom. Yeah, I don't know that I would look at that and go, that was a mushroom. But
You're right. They don't really look much at all like what you normally think of as a mushroom. They don't have that perfect little cap and that traditional mushroom shape, but they are a really interesting group of fungi. And as we mentioned in the video, these are gastromycete fungi. And while most mushrooms have spores on the underside of their cap and all those gills or pores, gastromycete, which means stomach fungi, create all of their spores in the center of that fruiting body itself. So they actually mature, the spores mature inside the mushroom and are then released through wind or animals treading on the fungi once they've fully matured.
So are they edible?
There are a couple species that some people will consume. The earth stars are not particularly edible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the puffball fungi that people do consume should probably be approached with some caution, because one of the things that these saprophytic mushrooms are really good at is absorbing chemicals from whatever it is that they're growing on. So a lot of these puffball fungi will grow on on grass or other decaying material, and they can often absorb harmful chemicals, oils, possibly heavy metals that might be in that substrate as well. One of the favorite places for some of these mushrooms to grow is along busy roadways, and you all know what the side of a highway is like. I don't think any of us would want to eat some of the things that are growing along there. But that does make them really interesting too, because people are looking at them as for possible bioremediation purposes.
I was going to
ask.
Cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. They do have this ability to uptake all of these things that maybe we wouldn't want to consume, but it might be good to be moving out of environments. So they do have some interesting applications.
Then do they poof them out when you?
They do, and it's so much fun. Kids especially love that. You know, you can have like poof mushroom and watch these little poofs of like smoky spores go up. Kids love puffball mushroom.
All right, so now we had the witch hazel, which was poofing out its seeds as well, and now we've got a mushroom that's poofing out its spores. So it's a poofy day today.
Sounds like a theme to me.
Megan, I really appreciate you putting these together. I mean, you are opening up our eyes to a whole world that a lot of us just kind of walk right by and never notice. So it's really cool introducing us to this world of mushrooms. So thank you so much for taking the time to do these.
Oh, you all are so welcome. Thank you for asking me to be here today.
Yeah, they're great. We'll have you back. We'll have you back for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Renee, we covered so much.
We did, and a lot of different topics
I
today.
know.
Very interesting show.
Yes, a lot of diversity here. So if you missed this, any of the episodes or any of our previous shows, make sure to check us out online from thewoodstoday.com. You can get us there. As always, we always have a survey up there that you can also let us know if you'd like to see something in the future. So please.
Definitely. And you know, eventually we're coming up on one of our 100th show, and kind of it's going to be in April. And so we're going to start taking tips, and you know, what would you like to see, and you know, let us know about that. So if you hit that survey on fromthewoodstoday.com, we can you can give us some ideas of what we might want our 100th show to be. And so we're going to try to see if we can get enough ideas and take them from there.
Yeah, please. And spread the word. Help us spread the word. We think there's a lot of other folks out there that would enjoy this content. And again, the great thing about having it recorded, Renee, you can kind of consume it at your leisure, right?
We have a lot of people that watch it after the fact, because, you know, we're right here during lunchtime.
Yeah.
Some people just can't take their lunch during that, but that's okay. You know, watch it and tell other people about it.
Yeah. Well, you know what, I would challenge all of our viewers, if you haven't seen all the shows, instead of binge watching Netflix, binge watch From the Woods Today. You will get so much content.
Blown away with information.
Yes. No, but seriously, we do appreciate having you all with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week. From the Woods Today.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.